The tragedy of Hamlet, Prince of Denmark, often shortened to Hamlet, is a tragedy written by William Shakespeare at an uncertain date between 1599 and 1602. Set in the Kingdom of Denmark, the play dramatizes the revenge Prince Hamlet is called upon to wreak upon his uncle, Claudius, by the ghost of Hamlet's father, King Hamlet. Claudius had murdered his own brother and seized the throne, also marrying his deceased brother's widow. Hamlet is Shakespeare's longest play, and is among the most powerful and influential tragedies in English literature. With a story capable of seemingly endless retelling and adaptation by others, the play likely was one of Shakespeare's most popular works during his lifetime, and still ranks among his most performed. Topping the performance list of the Royal Shakespeare Company and its predecessors in Stratford-upon-Avon since 1879. It has inspired many other writers, from Goethe and Dickens to Joyce and Murdoch, and has been described as the world's most filmed story after Cinderella. The story of Shakespeare's Hamlet was derived from the legend of Hamlet, preserved by 13th-century chronicler Saxo Grammaticus in his Gesta Danorum, as subsequently retold by 16th-century scholar François de Belleforest. Shakespeare may also have drawn on an earlier Elizabethan play known today as the Hamlet, though some scholars believe he himself wrote the Hamlet, later revising it to create the version of Hamlet we now have. He almost certainly wrote his version of the title role for his fellow actor, Richard Burbage, the leading tragedian of Shakespeare's time. In the almost 400 years since its inception, the role has been performed by numerous highly acclaimed actors in each successive century. 3 different early versions of the play are extant: the first quarto, the second quarto, and the first folio. Each version includes lines and entire scenes missing from the others. The play's structure and depth of characterization have inspired much critical scrutiny. One such example is the centuries-old debate about Hamlet's hesitation to kill his uncle, which some see as merely a plot device to prolong the action, but which others argue is a dramatization of the complex philosophical and ethical issues that surround cold-blooded murder, calculated revenge, and thwarted desire. More recently, psychoanalytic critics have examined Hamlet's unconscious desires, while feminist critics have re-evaluated and attempted to rehabilitate the often maligned characters of Ophelia and Gertrude. Characters: Hamlet, son of the late king and nephew of the present king; Claudius, king of Denmark and Hamlet's uncle; Gertrude, queen of Denmark and mother to Hamlet; Polonius, chief counselor to the king; Ophelia, daughter to Polonius; Horatio, friend to Hamlet; Laertes, son to Polonius; Voltimand and Cornelius, courtiers; Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, courtiers, friends to Hamlet; Osric, a courtier; Marcellus, an officer; Bernardo, an officer; Francisco, a soldier; Ronaldo, servant to Polonius; ghost of Hamlet's father; Fortinbras, prince of Norway; gravediggers, a sexton; player king, player queen, Lucianus, etc. Players: a priest, a captain in Fortinbras' army; English ambassadors, messengers, sailors, lords, ladies, guards, Danes. Plot: the protagonist of Hamlet is Prince Hamlet of Denmark, son of the recently deceased King Hamlet, and nephew of King Claudius, his father's brother and successor. Claudius hastily married King Hamlet's widow, Gertrude, Hamlet's mother, and took the throne for himself. Denmark has a long-standing feud with neighbouring Norway, which culminated when King Hamlet slew King Fortinbras of Norway in a battle years ago. Although Denmark defeated Norway, and the Norwegian throne fell to King Fortinbras's infirm brother, Denmark fears that an invasion led by the dead Norwegian king's son, Prince Fortinbras, is imminent. The play opens on a cold night on the ramparts of Elsinore, the Danish royal castle. The sentries Bernardo and Marcellus and Hamlet's friend Horatio encounter a ghost that looks like the late King Hamlet. They vow to tell Prince Hamlet what they have witnessed. As the court gathers the next day, while King Claudius and Queen Gertrude discuss affairs of state with their elderly advisor Polonius, Hamlet looks on glumly. After the court exits, Hamlet despairs of his father's death and his mother's hasty remarriage. Learning of the ghost from Horatio, Hamlet resolves to see it himself. As Polonius's son Laertes prepares to depart for a visit to France, Polonius gives him contradictory advice that culminates in the ironic maxim, "To thine own self be true." Polonius's daughter, Ophelia, admits her interest in Hamlet, but both Polonius and Laertes warn her against seeking the prince's attention. That night on the rampart, the ghost appears to Hamlet, telling the prince that he was murdered by Claudius and demanding that Hamlet avenge him. Hamlet agrees and the ghost vanishes. The prince confides to Horatio and the sentries that from now on he plans to put on an antic disposition, and forces them to swear to keep his plans for revenge secret. Privately, however, he remains uncertain of the ghost's reliability. Soon thereafter, Ophelia rushes to her father, telling him that Hamlet arrived at her door the prior night half undressed and behaving crazily. Polonius blames love for Hamlet's madness and resolves to inform Claudius and Gertrude. As he enters to do so, the king and queen finish welcome among Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, two student acquaintances of Hamlet, to Elsinore. The royal couple has requested that the students investigate the cause of Hamlet's mood and behavior. Additional news requires that Polonius wait to be heard. Messengers from Norway inform Claudius that the King of Norway has rebuked Prince Fortinbras for attempting to refight his father's battles. The forces that Fortinbras conscripted to march against Denmark will instead be sent against Poland, though they will pass through a portion of Denmark to get there. Polonius tells Claudius and Gertrude his theory regarding Hamlet's behavior, and speaks to Hamlet in a hall of the castle to try to uncover more information. Hamlet feigns madness but subtly insults Polonius all the while. When Rosencrantz and Guildenstern arrive, Hamlet greets his friends warmly, but quickly discerns that they are spies. Hamlet becomes bitter, admitting that he is upset at his situation but refusing to give the true reason why, instead commenting on what a piece of work humanity is. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern tell Hamlet that they have brought along a troupe of actors that they met while traveling to Elsinore. Hamlet, after welcoming the actors and dismissing his friends turned spies, plots to stage a play featuring a death in the style of his father's murder, thereby determining the truth of the ghost's story, as well as Claudius's guilt or innocence, by studying Claudius's reaction. Polonius forces Ophelia to return Hamlet's love letters and tokens of affection to the prince while he and Claudius watch from afar to evaluate Hamlet's reaction. Hamlet is walking alone in the hall as the king and Polonius await Ophelia's entrance, musing whether to be or not to be, when Ophelia enters and tries to return Hamlet's things. Hamlet accuses her of immodesty and cries, "Get thee to a nunnery," though it is unclear whether this, too, is a show of madness or genuine distress. His reaction convinces Claudius that Hamlet is not mad for love. Shortly thereafter, the court assembles to watch the play Hamlet has commissioned. After seeing the play A King Murdered by His Rival pouring poison in his ear, Claudius abruptly rises and runs from the room. Proof positive for Hamlet of his uncle's guilt. Gertrude summons Hamlet to her room to demand an explanation. Meanwhile, Claudius talks to himself about the impossibility of repenting, since he still has possession of his ill-gotten goods, his brother's crown and wife. He sinks to his knees. Hamlet, on his way to visit his mother, sneaks up behind him, but does not kill him, reasoning that killing Claudius while he is praying will send him straight to heaven while the ghost is stuck in purgatory. In the queen's bedchamber, Hamlet and Gertrude fight bitterly. Polonius, spying on the conversation from behind a tapestry, makes a noise. Hamlet, believing it is Claudius, stabs wildly, killing Polonius, but pulls aside the curtain and sees his mistake. In a rage, Hamlet brutally insults his mother for her apparent ignorance of Claudius's villainy. But the ghost enters and reprimands Hamlet for his inaction in harsh words. Unable to see or hear the ghost herself, Gertrude takes Hamlet's conversation with it as further evidence of madness. After begging the queen to stop sleeping with Claudius, Hamlet leaves, dragging Polonius's corpse away. Hamlet jokes with Claudius about where he has hidden Polonius's body, and the king, fearing for his life, sends Rosencrantz and Guildenstern to accompany Hamlet to England with a sealed letter to the English king requesting that Hamlet be executed immediately. Demented by grief at Polonius's death, Ophelia wanders Elsinore. Laertes arrives back from France, enraged by his father's death and his sister's madness. Claudius convinces Laertes that Hamlet is solely responsible, but a letter soon arrives indicating that Hamlet has returned to Denmark, foiling Claudius's plan. Claudius switches tactics, proposing a fencing match between Laertes and Hamlet to settle their differences. Laertes will be given a poison-tipped foil, and Claudius will offer Hamlet poisoned wine as a congratulation if that fails. Gertrude interrupts to report that Ophelia has drowned, though it is unclear whether it was suicide or an accident exacerbated by her madness. Horatio has received a letter from Hamlet, explaining that the prince escaped by negotiating with pirates who attempted to attack his England-bound ship, and the friends reunite offstage. Two gravediggers discuss Ophelia's apparent suicide while digging her grave. Hamlet arrives with Horatio and banters with one of the gravediggers, who unearths the skull of a jester from Hamlet's childhood, Yorick. Hamlet picks up the skull, saying, "Alas, poor Yorick," as he contemplates mortality. Ophelia's funeral procession approaches, led by Laertes. Hamlet and Horatio initially hide, but when Hamlet realizes that Ophelia is the one being buried, he reveals himself, proclaiming his love for her. Laertes and Hamlet fight by Ophelia's graveside, but the brawl is broken up. Back at Elsinore, Hamlet explains to Horatio that he had discovered Claudius's letter with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern's belongings and replaced it with a forged copy, indicating that his former friends should be killed instead. A foppish courtier, Osric, interrupts the conversation to deliver the fencing challenge to Hamlet. Hamlet, despite Horatio's advice, accepts it. Hamlet does well at first, leading the match by 2 hits to none, and Gertrude raises a toast to him using the poisoned glass of wine Claudius had set aside for Hamlet. Claudius tries to stop her, but is too late. She drinks, and Laertes realizes the plot will be revealed. Laertes slashes Hamlet with his poisoned blade. In the ensuing scuffle, they switch weapons and Hamlet wounds Laertes with his own poisoned sword. Gertrude collapses and, claiming she has been poisoned, dies. In his dying moments, Laertes reconciles with Hamlet and reveals Claudius's plan. Hamlet rushes at Claudius and kills him. As the poison takes effect, Hamlet, hearing that Fortinbras is marching through the area, names the Norwegian prince as his successor. Horatio, distraught at the thought of being the last survivor, says he will commit suicide by drinking the dregs of Gertrude's poisoned wine. But Hamlet begs him to live on and tell his story. Hamlet dies, proclaiming, "The rest is silence." Fortinbras, who was ostensibly marching towards Poland with his army, arrives at the palace, along with an English ambassador bringing news of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern's deaths. Date: any dating of Hamlet must be tentative, cautions the New Cambridge editor, Philip Edwards. The earliest date estimate relies on Hamlet's frequent allusions to Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, itself dated to mid-1599. The latest date estimate is based on an entry of the 26th of July 1602 in the Register of the Stationers' Company, indicating that Hamlet was latterly acted by the Low Chamberlain his servantus. In 1598, Francis Mears published his Palladis Tamia, a survey of English literature from Chaucer to its present day, within which 12 of Shakespeare's plays are named. Hamlet is not among them, suggesting that it had not yet been written. As Hamlet was very popular, Bernard Lott, the series editor of New Swan, believes it unlikely that he, Mears, would have overlooked so significant a piece. The phrase, little heiresses, in the first folio may allude to the children of the chapel, whose popularity in London forced the Globe Company into provincial touring. This became known as the War of the Theatres, and supports a 1601 dating. Catherine Duncan Jones accepts a 1600-1 attribution for the date Hamlet was written, but notes that the Lord Chamberlain's men, playing Hamlet in the 3,000-capacity Globe, were unlikely to be put to any disadvantage by an audience of barely 100, for the Children of the Chapel's equivalent play, Antonio's Revenge. She believes that Shakespeare, confident in the superiority of his own work, was making a playful and charitable allusion to his friend John Marston's very similar piece. A contemporary of Shakespeare's, Gabriel Harvey, wrote a marginal note in his copy of the 1598 edition of Chaucer's works, which some scholars use as dating evidence. Harvey's note says that the wiser sort enjoy Hamlet, and implies that the Earl of Essex, executed in February 1601 for rebellion, was still alive. Other scholars consider this inconclusive. Edwards, for example, concludes that the sense of time is so confused in Harvey's note that it is really of little use in trying to date Hamlet. This is because the same note also refers to Spencer and Watson as if they were still alive, but also mentions Owen's New Epigrams, published in 1607. Texts. 3 early editions of the text have survived, making attempts to establish a single, authentic, text problematic. Each is different from the others. First quarto. In 1603 the booksellers Nicholas Ling and John Trundell published, and Valentine Simmis printed, the so-called bad first quarto. Q1 contains just over half of the text of the later second quarto. Second quarto. In 1604 Nicholas Ling published, and James Roberts printed, the second quarto. Some copies are dated 1605, which may indicate a second impression. Consequently, Q2 is often dated 1604/5. Q2 is the longest early edition, although it omits about 77 lines found in F1. First folio. In 1623 Edward Blunt and William and Isaac Jaggard published the first folio, the first edition of Shakespeare's complete works. Other folios and quartos were subsequently published, including John Smethwick's Q3, Q4, and Q5, but these are regarded as derivatives of the first 3 editions. Early editors of Shakespeare's works, beginning with Nicholas Rowe and Lewis Theobald, combined material from the 2 earliest sources of Hamlet available at the time, Q2 and F1. Each text contains material that the other lacks, with many minor differences in wording. Scarcely 200 lines are identical in the 2. Editors have combined them in an effort to create one inclusive text that reflects an imagined ideal of Shakespeare's original. Theobald's version became standard for a long time, and his full-text approach continues to influence editorial practice to the present day. Some contemporary scholarship, however, discounts this approach, instead considering an authentic Hamlet an unrealizable ideal. There are texts of this play but no text. The 2006 publication by Arden Shakespeare of different Hamlet texts in different volumes is perhaps evidence of this shifting focus and emphasis. Traditionally, editors of Shakespeare's plays have divided them into 5 acts. None of the early texts of Hamlet, however, were arranged this way, and the play's division into acts and scenes derives from a 1676 quarto. Modern editors generally follow this traditional division, but consider it unsatisfactory. For example, after Hamlet drags Polonius's body out of Gertrude's bedchamber, there is an act break after which the action appears to continue uninterrupted. The discovery in 1823 of Q1, whose existence had been quite unsuspected, caused considerable interest and excitement, raising many questions of editorial practice and interpretation. Scholars immediately identified apparent deficiencies in Q1, which was instrumental in the development of the concept of a Shakespearean bad quarto. Yet Q1 has value. It contains stage directions that reveal actual stage practices in a way that Q2 and F1 do not. It contains an entire scene that does not appear in either Q2 or F1, and it is useful for comparison with the later editions. The scene order is more coherent, without the problems of Q2 and F1 of Hamlet seeming to resolve something in one scene and enter the next drowning in indecision. The major deficiency of Q1 is in the language, particularly noticeable in the opening lines of the famous "to be, or not to be" soliloquy. To be, or not to be, either's the point. To die, to sleep, is that all? I all. No, to sleep, to dream. I marry, there it goes. Q1 is considerably shorter than Q2 or F1 and may be a memorial reconstruction of the play as Shakespeare's company performed it, by an actor who played a minor role. Scholars disagree whether the reconstruction was pirated or authorized. Another theory, considered by New Cambridge editor Kathleen Iris, holds that Q1 is an abridged version intended especially for traveling productions. The idea that Q1 is not riddled with error but is instead eminently fit for the stage has led to at least 28 different Q1 productions since 1881.